understand means actually stand under my authority, because you're acknowledging your jurisdiction over you at that point. That flag there, I should mention since you raised it, that was given to me at Ganawage. It's called a Turo Wampum, and in a nutshell, it was the original treaty signed between the indigenous people, the Dutch, and then the English, which said that it recognizes the equality of two different cultures, and we're to live side by side and not seek to dominate one another. That treaty was abrogated by Europeans in all subsequent laws. So what they said is, they're authorizing me to bring that message to my people, and to say that one thing that European Canadians can do is to say, we don't recognize the authority of the Crown to act in this way, because it's an authority that's based on the revoking of the original understanding between the two peoples, that we treat each other equally and not with this bogus Indian Act, this apartheid law, which allows us to continue to grab the land. So I think that's an important way when you say what can white people do, to say know your own history and stand on your own jurisdiction, not the Crown. Assimilated in a Canadian society. We're not citizens, we're members of our own nation. So that has to be accompanied with a recognition of true sovereignty. True treaty, which is nation to nation recognition. So I think a political future of Canada would be as a cutting ties with the Crown, establishing a federated republic of different nations on an equal basis. And that's, to me, it's just like with Catholic priests. You say, well, you're going to make them public servants, license them so that when they hurt a kid, they can lose their job. You don't leave them under the authority of this bullshit canon law, which allows kids, if you're a child rapist, you can become a priest and no problem. You'll get to do it and never be prosecuted. That's the reality. So it's ultimately about jurisdiction and what authority you're under, and I think we have to look at those long-term political changes too.
Thanks for your comment and question.
And
Judy?
be able to tell people what this is all about.
It's too long to go into all the details.
Right.
It's been a long thing, and it started at our tribunal in 1998. And it started in a big way after that, because at the tribunal, people got up and began to name some names of some of the northern Native chiefs involved in child trafficking and their links with the federal government. And the deals they signed about the El Cantu project, which forced a lot of Native people off the land, to get the hydroelectric projects built there and everything. So after that, it started, and in a nutshell, you could say that, and we know where it comes from. We know it comes from E Division of the RCMP, because Inspector Peter Montague talked about this, about, I won't get into the details, but he's the same guy who organized the smear of the groups that were, remember the Gustafson Lake standoff in 1995. They destroyed that solidarity movement the same way they did the American Indian movement. They call it bad jacketing. They target the best activists and start rumors about them, that they're cops, that they deal drugs, that they rape women. Soon everybody's shooting each other. And that's the group we organized to set up the tribunal was destroyed from within. It's happened 3 times to me in groups I've tried to set up. It's consistent. And and initially it started, and I don't know the extent to which they're still involved, but initially it started out of the General Council Office of the United Church. And a guy called Dave Iverson, who circulated all of this stuff about me after the tribunal. So, of course it's going to happen. You've got to expect that to happen. I always say, and I've met Noam Chomsky in Boston when I was speaking at MIT, and he was sitting there saying, he's heard it all, right? He said, yeah, they used to say that I slept with graduate students. The FBI started this thing that I was sleeping with all the grad students. And I was asked that on CBS once, and I said, show me the evidence. And there's no evidence, of course. There's this rumor and hearsay, and so that's all I say. Let's see. There's one Native woman I know who's ever said anything like that. Her name was Amy Talio. I've got a letter from her sister, Irene Starr, who was told by Amy that she was approached by this guy, Jim Craven, who showed up at our tribunal and offered his services as a judge, and within a day was saying Kevin's getting people to make up stories. Turns out this Craven fellow worked for, has already been named by the Sea Shepherd Society, because he conducted a similar campaign against Paul Watson. So he's obviously an agent, but what Amy did was she went out, and she's the only Native person who I've ever found who made that claim. She said that I was using her testimony without her permission. The point is, she had gotten up at the mics of the tribunal and shared her story already before then. So how could she can then say that she didn't give permission? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But the best way to discredit somebody is you get somebody within the group who they work with to say, all these terrible things about them. So I just say, people are free to have whatever the opinion they want about me. That's fine, let's have a debate, but let's base it on evidence. and not hearsay, and there hasn't been any evidence coming out. It's all been this, but it's pervasive, it's very effective, and it comes down to the fact that a lot of people in my culture don't want to believe this, and so they'll look for any excuse, and I found that with the Quakers the other night, when people said, well, I can't believe this about the United Church, therefore he's got to be making it up. He's got to be, and so they're willing to believe these things. Right?
Troublemaker.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of us have been through it. It just, in this case, it's more extreme because these perpetrators are still alive. The government and the churches and that are still profiting off this. The multinational corporations and you can see this in the film, when I found out that the United Church was selling off native land to Weyerhaeuser and big logging companies. Yeah, this is about big money, and we know how these guys operate, so none of it's a surprise.
Last call for speakers, yes and yes.
Like the Pope said, I'm sorry for what happened. It's too bad it happened to you guys, but there's no liability attached to that. An apologetic is a defense of one's actions. You find that in literature, an apologetic. Okay, so when the Prime Minister makes an apology, it's being understood legally as saying, we didn't do anything actually wrong, we're not responsible. That's what an apology is under the law. So we don't want an apology. Anyway, in a lot of native languages, you can tell me if this is true here, but on the West Coast, there's no word for I'm sorry because it's something resolved in practice. In practice, we see what the Canadian government's doing. They're killing people off. They hand $10,000 to a guy in drugs, and what do you think is going to happen? Right? That's a deliberate act. Okay, so we don't want apologies. We want transformation. We want, right?
Self-government.
Create an appearance of something, but it has no consequence. There's no legal power. They can't subpoena documents. They can't compel the churches to disclose anything. You can't use evidence gathered in the TRC in a court case. You can't sue the churches. They've all been indemnified. So it's kind of like Clifford Olson, the serial killer, has an inquiry into his actions. He appoints the judge, he appoints the jury, he makes all the statements. He tells the families of his victims how much money they're going to get for the murder he did. That's what you have in Canada right now, except the people doing it are more prolific serial killers. They killed 50,000 children, the churches, the government. So the TRC is really an enormous miscarriage of justice. And under international law, what it's doing is can get Canada indicted because it's obstructing justice. It's preventing people from telling the truth. And I've had people go to and I was at the TRC forum in Winnipeg. It was absolutely disgusting what I saw there. They were trying to vet people's statements before they got up at the mic. They were telling people they had 3 minutes at the mic. They wouldn't pay their way to come down to it, but they had enough money to bring in a rock band for $500,000 to have nice entertainment for people. I mean, people got to know what their tax money is going towards, and that's just nonsense.
Okay, I get it. You're saying
Yeah.
my friend Teresa is
And what you should do is, this is why it comes down to we need our own inquiry.
I guess she knows.
Pardon me?
She's a smart woman.
She doesn't know. Go to the TRC mandate. Tell her to go to trc.ca and look in section 2. It lays out the mandate, what they can and can't do. People have got to read that. And they also need to know we need our own inquiry. This is everything we're doing comes down to the fact that we need to document it and then decide for ourselves what action we want to take. If the courts and police aren't going to arrest child rapists, citizens have the obligation to do that. So we've got to start taking power in our own hands about this.
In terms of the inquiry in London,
Yeah.
what is it exactly that you're looking for to get?
We want to get indictments in international courts against the people responsible for this, including the
When you say
institutions.
people responsible, though,
Stephen Harper.
the actual person who did it to his child, or do you mean the institution?
We're talking both, because at Nuremberg they put the institution on trial symbolically by trying the heads of this. The heads of the United Catholic Anglican Churches, the Pope, the Queen of England, these people are under international law, should be standing trial. And not issuing money and being patted on the back for doing the right thing. That's, this is what we need to bring about. Thanks again to you and Barry and Socialist Action for sponsoring this. I hope we can do more of these in the future.
Our pleasure. Thank you all for coming. Come to Rebel Films. Come to the conferences coming up. Get a copy of our paper. Get some literature. And together we shall overcome.
All right.